"I need you here now, Georgia," Trent Jackson said into his earpiece, his voice tight. "This whole gala is seconds from melting down." Georgia Grant yanked off her kitten heels and sprinted barefoot down the marble hallway of the Manhattan Grand Palais, dodging tuxedoed guests and waiters carrying champagne flutes. She clutched her tablet to her chest and whispered, "I'm coming, boss. Just don't throw the mayor into the chocolate fountain." She rounded the corner and spotted him 6'2", black tux tailored to perfection, hair swept back like he walked straight out of a GQ shoot. Trent Jackson, billionaire CEO of Jackson Global, the man who signed her paychecks and drove her crazy with impossible demands and unfairly perfect cheekbones. He stood stiffly near the ballroom entrance, jaw clenched, glaring at the stage where the keynote speaker was supposed to be. "Where is he?" he asked as soon as she reached him, still stuck in traffic, she panted, slipping on her heels again. "I'm working on a backup. Maybe the deputy mayor—" "No," he interrupted, eyes scanning the crowd with military precision. "This fundraiser is for the Jackson Foundation. I won't let it flop because some politician can't read a GPS." Georgia opened her mouth, but he was already walking away. She kept up with him, weaving through the glittering crowd of New York elites. "Okay, then what's the plan?" she asked. "You're the plan," he said bluntly. She stopped. "Excuse me," he turned, his jaw still tight, but his eyes held something else: desperation. Or maybe trust. "You know the talking points, you wrote half the speech, you've been in every meeting, you're the only person who can pull this off." Georgia stared up at him, her heart thudding. "Trent, I'm your assistant, I'm not trained for this." "You're not just my assistant," he said, eyes locking with hers. "You're the only person I trust not to screw this up." Everything around them disappeared for a second: the chandeliers, the clinking glasses, the murmurs of billionaires and socialites. It was just him and her. Then reality slammed back in. "They'll eat me alive," she muttered. "These people are sharks." "Then you're a lion," Trent said, and before she could protest again, he gently pushed her toward the stage. 20 minutes later, Georgia stood under the spotlight, her palms damp and heart pounding. She adjusted the mic, the room falling into a hush. "I'm Georgia Grant," she began, voice surprisingly steady, "and I've been working beside Trent Jackson for 4 years. Some might say behind him, but tonight he asked me to speak for him because what we're doing tonight isn't about fame or money. It's about people." She caught Trent's eyes across the room. He gave her a single nod, and then the words just came. She spoke about the foundation's mission: building homes for displaced families, funding scholarships, backing medical research. She told a story about a boy in Harlem who got a second chance because of a Jackson Foundation grant. The crowd leaned in. They weren't just listening, they were moved. When she stepped off the stage, the ballroom erupted in applause. Trent met her at the bottom of the steps. "You just saved the night." "I didn't faint," she breathed. "I thought I might." "You were incredible," he said, his voice softer now. "Don't sound so surprised," she teased, smiling up at him. He didn't smile back, not quite. But his gaze held her a second too long, lingering at her lips before flicking away. "Come on. Let's get you a drink." He led her through the crowd, guests stopping to compliment her, waiters offering champagne, one woman from the governor's office asking if Georgia was available for public speaking gigs. She laughed it off, pretending she wasn't still shaking inside. Trent guided her to a roped-off balcony that overlooked the lights of the city. It was quiet, cool, and far from the buzz of the gala. "That was the best speech of the night," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "Because it was the only one," she replied, sipping. He leaned against the railing beside her. "You've got guts, Grant. 4 years of working for you will do that to a girl," he chuckled, and the sound was so rare, so boyish, she turned to look at him. "I mean it," he said, eyes on her now. "You've always been good, but tonight you were something else." Her cheeks warmed. "Don't make me blush in a $10,000 dress I don't own." "You do now," he said casually. "What?" "I had it charged to my account. Consider it a thank you." Her eyes went wide. "Trent, this is a designer gown. It probably costs more than my car." Then you need a better car too, he said, raising his glass. She stared at him. Are you serious? I'm always serious. I can't accept that. You can, he said, stepping closer, and you will. Their glasses clinked. Silence fell between them, heavy, pulsing, not awkward but charged. Georgia looked out at the skyline. You didn't have to rely on me tonight, you know. You could have picked anyone. I didn't want anyone else, he said. She turned toward him slowly. And I didn't know what that meant until just now, he added, his eyes locked on hers. But I think I'm starting to. The air shifted, she swallowed. Trent. He stepped even closer. I don't date staff, Georgia. I never have, I know. But tonight, watching you out there. I forgot that rule. She didn't pull away when he reached up and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. Then a voice called from the hallway. Mr. Jackson, they need you for a press photo. He blinked, stepping back. Georgia's breath caught like her lungs had been pulled inside out. Right, he said, clearing his throat. Back to work. She nodded, clutching her champagne glass just to keep her hands from shaking. And as he walked away, she told herself it didn't mean anything, but deep down she already knew it meant everything. Georgia stood in front of her apartment's cracked mirror, trying to decide if the lipstick was too much. Probably. But after last night, everything felt different. Trent had looked at her like she wasn't just his assistant, like she was something else, something he hadn't seen before. She capped the lipstick and grabbed her phone, checking the time. 7:45. He'd told her to be ready by 8, no explanation, just that a car would come. Sure enough, a sleek black Mercedes waited outside her building 10 minutes later. The driver offered a small nod and opened the door without a word. Georgia slid into the back seat, her nerves twisting into something unfamiliar, not anxiety, not exactly. Anticipation. They drove uptown, past the rush of streetlights and honking taxis, until the buildings grew taller and sleeker. Then they pulled into a private entrance beneath a high rise she'd only ever seen in magazines. The doorman opened the car door like she was royalty. Miss Grant, he said, like he knew her name. She stepped into the marble lobby, stunned by the quiet opulence. No music, no crowd. Just soft lighting, rich wood panels, and a private elevator already open. The elevator doors shut behind her, and the numbers climbed. The doors opened to a penthouse that looked like something out of a Bond film, floor-to-ceiling windows, a fireplace taller than she was, and a view of Manhattan that made her breath catch. Trent stood near a long table set for two, sleeves rolled up, jacket gone, glass of wine in one hand. You found it, he said. Hard to miss the entire city wrapped in glass, she replied, stepping inside. Is this your apartment? He handed her a glass. One of them. Georgia raised a brow. You said we were reviewing the donor list tonight. We are, he said. After dinner, she glanced at the firelit table. This doesn't look like takeout and spreadsheets. I hired a chef. Of course you did. He poured another splash of wine into her glass. You hated the Gala food. She narrowed her eyes. I never said that. You didn't have to. You pushed your plate away after one bite. The chef appeared briefly from the kitchen to serve the first course, some kind of delicate seafood thing Georgia couldn't pronounce, but tasted like heaven. She sat across from him, trying to act natural while her pulse pounded. Why are you doing this? You saved me last night. You already bought me a dress. This isn't about the dress. She set her fork down. Then what is it about? He leaned forward, elbows on the table. I've been trying to figure that out all day. Georgia didn't respond, and the silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. I'm not good at this, he said finally. At what dinner? At not being in control, he said. I run companies, buy out rivals. I don't hesitate, but with you. I keep second-guessing, she stared at him. You're scared. I'm annoyed, he corrected. That I can't stop thinking about someone who works for me. Georgia laughed softly. That's romantic. I didn't say it was rational. You think I haven't tried to shut it off? She asked, her voice quieter now. I've worked beside you for years. I've seen the way you compartmentalize everything. You don't let anyone in. And now suddenly you invite me here, pour me wine and talk about losing control. Trent stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. When I was 25, I nearly lost the company my father built. I made a deal I thought was smart. It wasn't. I spent the next 5 years cleaning up the fallout. I learned not to trust anyone who hadn't bled for what they wanted. Georgia rose slowly. You think I haven't bled, he turned. That's not what I meant. I've worked 2 jobs since I was 17. I paid off my mother's medical debt before I finished college. I've never taken a vacation that didn't involve a laptop. So don't stand there and act like I haven't earned where I am. Trent's jaw tightened. I know you have. That's why you scare the hell out of me, she blinked. What? You know me better than anyone, he said. You see everything, and you still stay. That's not loyalty, that's dangerous. Georgia stepped closer. You think love is dangerous? I think with the wrong person, it's a weakness. And with the right person, he didn't answer. She reached for her coat. Maybe you should figure that out before inviting someone to dinner. But before she could leave, he crossed the room in 2 strides and caught her hand. I don't want to lose you, he said, his voice low. You've never had me, she replied, breath catching. He stepped closer, his eyes trained on hers. Not yet. Georgia's heart beat wildly. Then why now? He hesitated. Because last night I didn't care who was watching when I looked at you. She stared up at him, the city lights behind them glowing like fireflies. And just like that, the ground shifted, not with a kiss. Not with a confession, but with a promise waiting to be made. The next morning, Georgia didn't go into the office. She sat at her kitchen table, coffee untouched, staring at her open laptop as her inbox piled up. Her heart was still tangled in the way Trent had looked at her the night before, like she wasn't just someone who knew where his files were and how he liked his espresso, but someone who might matter. The knock on her door startled her. She opened it to find a man in a charcoal suit holding a garment bag and a white envelope. For you, Miss Grant. She took them, confused. The envelope was thick, her name handwritten in bold, angled strokes. The dress inside the bag was navy silk, cut with clean lines and delicate lace along the shoulders. It was elegant, expensive. She didn't need the tag to know it cost more than her rent. Inside the envelope was a single folded card, dinner, 8 o'clock. Wear the dress. Georgia nearly laughed. Of course he wouldn't ask. Of course he would assume. She stared at the card for a long time before setting it on the table and walking to her closet. By 7:30 she was in a car again. But this time her pulse was steadier. She wasn't confused anymore. She knew exactly what this was now. Trent Jackson didn't do casual dinner invites. He didn't send gowns to women he didn't intend to keep close. Still, she wasn't prepared for where the driver took her, not another penthouse, not a restaurant. The car slowed in front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But instead of turning toward the public entrance, they slipped around to a private side lot, where 2 men in suits stood beside a side door. One of them opened it as she stepped out. Inside, the museum was dark and silent except for one faint, glowing light at the top of the grand staircase. Georgia followed it carefully, heels clicking on marble, until she reached the Temple of Dendur. It was empty. Lit only by the soft golden halos of floor lights beneath the ancient stone columns. And in the center of the room, a table for 2. Trent stood beside it, adjusting his cufflink like he hadn't just brought her to one of the most iconic spaces in the city and made it theirs alone. You rented out the Met? She asked, stunned. He looked up, eyes scanning her. No, I sponsored their new conservation wing. This was a thank you. She raised a brow. You're impossible. That's not the word I'd use, he said, stepping forward. But I'll take it. She let him lead her to the table. A waiter appeared from the shadows, pouring wine and setting down porcelain bowls of something fragrant and delicate. Trent didn't speak for a while, neither did she. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Finally, she set her fork down. Why here? He watched her carefully. Because I wanted to show you what it looks like when I stop thinking about what's expected and start thinking about what I want. She folded her hands in her lap. And what do you want? He didn't hesitate. You. Her stomach flipped. But not as a distraction, not as a secret, he said. I want you beside me, not behind me. I'm not sure I know how to be beside you, she admitted. That world, your world, it's built on rules I've never lived by. Then we build new ones, he said simply. She looked away, unsettled by how easily he said it. Georgia, he said, his voice quieter now, I've made a career out of not needing anyone. You know that better than anyone, but this last week, I felt something I haven't felt in years. She met his eyes again. What's that? Unsteady, her breath caught. I've built empires, he continued, but I never built a life, not really. I filled it with meetings and mergers with people who needed something from me, but you've never needed a damn thing. Not even when you should have. She didn't know what to say to that. Her mouth opened, then closed again. I'm not asking you to fall into something reckless, he said. I'm asking for a chance, one that's honest, out in the open. And if it doesn't work, she asked cautiously. Then I'll still respect you, he said. And I'll still owe you more than I can say, but I won't go on pretending I don't feel this. I can't. The room felt impossibly still. Outside, the city moved on cars, lights, crowds, but here, time slowed. I've never been someone's first choice, she said finally. Not really. You are now, he said quietly. And I don't make choices lightly. She pressed her palm to the table, grounding herself. Then let's stop pretending we're just navigating logistics, she said. You want something real. So do I. He reached across the table, resting his hand over hers. Then we start tonight, he said. No games, no hiding. She nodded once. And for the first time since she'd met Trent Jackson, Georgia Grant wasn't wondering what he'd ask of her next. She was wondering how far she'd let herself fall. 2 weeks later, Georgia stood at the edge of the rooftop terrace of the Jackson Global Headquarters, the city stretching out below her in a blur of silver and midnight. The benefit dinner had ended hours ago, the last of the guests long gone, but Trent hadn't left. Neither had she. The wind pulled at her curls as she watched him on the other side of the terrace, still in his tuxedo, his tie gone and shirt collar open. He was speaking with an older man in a navy suit, one of the board members. Until recently, Georgia would have kept her distance, waiting for a signal to approach. But tonight, she knew better. He was watching for her too. As the conversation ended, Trent crossed the terrace toward her, his expression unreadable. When he stopped in front of her, he didn't say anything right away, just looked at her in a way that made her feel like nothing else in the world existed. You waited, he said. You asked me to, she replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Even if you didn't say it out loud, he glanced toward the skyline, jaw flexing. I had a meeting with the board. They want me to open a second headquarters in London. They're pushing for it to happen by fall. She didn't react, not yet. And do you want it? She asked after a beat. I want to build something that lasts, he said. But I don't want to do it the way I used to, alone, detached, halfway across the world from the people who matter. Georgia's heart stumbled slightly, but she kept her eyes steady on his. I told them I'd think about it, he added, voice low. She exhaled slowly. So what happens if you go? I don't want to leave New York, he said. But if I do, I want you there with me. Her brows lifted, uncertain. You mean working remotely? He shook his head. I mean with me, not as my assistant, not as part of some professional transition. As the woman I want beside me in my life, in whatever future I'm building. She didn't answer. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because it felt too big to say in front of the city like that, too raw. He stepped closer, voice quieter now. I know I can't make you choose this. I know what it would mean leaving everything behind, starting over somewhere new. But I don't want to build another empire if you're not part of it. She studied him. Not the billionaire who had flown her to private museum dinners or the man who lived in penthouses and closed deals worth millions. But the one who, for all his control, had just admitted he was afraid of losing something he hadn't even had for very long. I don't need London, she said finally. His brow lifted slightly. I need to know that if I step into this with you, I'm not just another beautiful moment you move past when the next challenge comes along. I need to know it's real. Trent's expression didn't change, but something in his posture softened. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a black velvet box. Georgia blinked. I'm not proposing, he said quickly, opening the box to reveal a key on a silver chain. I'm asking you to take the next step with me, whatever that looks like to you. This key opens the door to the brownstone on West 96th. I bought it last week. It needs work, it's not perfect, but I want to build it with you. She stared at the key, her throat thick. It's not a contract. It's not a promise wrapped in diamonds, he added. It's just a door. To something new. She reached for it, her fingers brushing his as she lifted the chain from the box. Her heart thudded against her ribs. I never imagined this, she said quietly. Neither did I, he replied. But I've never wanted anything more. They stood there, the wind catching her dress and the city below blinking its million lights like stars. All right, she said finally. Let's see what's behind the door. He pulled her into his arms, not with urgency, not like someone claiming something, but like someone grateful it was finally real. She pressed her face against his shoulder, breathing him in. You're going to be terrible at painting walls and picking furniture. I'll hire someone. Absolutely not. If we're doing this, you're learning how to build bookshelves. He leaned back, eyes warm. Deal, but only if you promise not to alphabetize the spice rack again. Absolutely not. That's non-negotiable. He kissed her then slowly, like he had all the time in the world to learn her, and she kissed him back like he was already home. In the weeks that followed, they didn't rush. They didn't need to. Trent surprised her every day, not with gifts or grand declarations, but in quieter ways. Early mornings spent painting crooked walls. Evenings reading on the floor of a half-furnished living room. A life built in pieces, with laughter and music and arguments about tile colors. The business didn't fall apart without him in the center of every decision. He still signed contracts, still flew across the country when necessary, but always came home, and Georgia. She didn't fade into the background. She redefined what it meant to stand beside him, not as an assistant, not as a shadow, but as an equal. Months later, at a small dinner with only their closest friends, Trent stood and raised his glass. She saved me, he said simply, eyes never leaving hers. I thought I built this life on my own. But it turns out, I was waiting for someone to remind me what living actually feels like. Georgia smiled, fingers laced with his under the table, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was behind him. She felt like she was exactly where she was always meant to be. Beside the man who had once relied on her to save a gala, never knowing he'd soon love her forever. Trent stood in the dusty foyer of the brownstone, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a wrench in one hand and a faint scowl between his brows. Georgia leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him stare at the radiator like it had personally betrayed him. You know that's not the valve, she said. He didn't look away. I'm aware. Then why are you threatening it with a wrench? I'm asserting dominance. Georgia walked over and gently took the tool from his hand. You're going to flood the whole floor. I already called the plumber, he admitted. He said he'll be here in 20 minutes. She nodded. Smart move. Trent glanced at her, eyes flicking downward. Is that my shirt? She looked down at the oversized Oxford falling off one shoulder. You left it on the back of the door, finders keepers. I'll allow it, he said, stepping closer. Generous of you. He slid his arms around her waist, careful to avoid the grease smudges on his hands. I was thinking, he murmured against her hair, we should cancel everything this weekend. No meetings, no site visits, no donor brunches. Just us. In this half-painted house with no heat, he kissed her temple. Exactly. She tilted her head up. I thought you didn't know how to slow down. I didn't, he said, but you're a good teacher. Before she could answer, the doorbell chimed. Georgia stepped back, her smile lingering. I'll get it, she said. The plumber arrived gruff, efficient, and entirely unimpressed by the billionaire in a paint-streaked sweatshirt. Trent hovered while the man worked, offering unsolicited suggestions until Georgia dragged him away with the promise of coffee and a distraction. They settled on the floor of the living room, surrounded by open boxes and swatches of fabric. The walls were still bare, the floors scuffed, but the space already felt like theirs. Do you ever miss it? Georgia asked, tracing circles on the rim of her mug. The version of your life before all this, he didn't hesitate. No. You never wonder what it would have been like if we just kept things the way they were, he set his mug down. I had everything I thought I wanted, power, control, order, but it was built on distance, from people, from risk. From anything that could make me feel too much, she looked over at him. And now I feel everything, he said, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Georgia nodded slowly, then reached into a nearby box and pulled out a photo frame, dust still clinging to the glass. It held a picture of them from the fundraiser the moment after her speech, when the applause had just begun. She hadn't known anyone had taken it. Trent was looking at her with something so raw, so unguarded it made her throat tighten. "Where'd you get this?" she asked. "I found it on a flash drive Marcy gave me," said the photographer didn't even realize he'd captured it. She ran her fingers over the frame. "I want that one on the mantel," he said. "Right above the fireplace, first thing people see when they come in," she smiled. "You're really doing this." "The whole normal life thing." "I'm not sure what normal looks like," he said, "but I know what real feels like, and this, it's real." She leaned in, brushing her lips to his. "Then let's make it permanent," he froze, pulling back just enough to study her face. "What do you mean?" Georgia reached into the pocket of the sweatshirt and pulled out a small slip of paper. He took it, unfolding it carefully. It was a deed, signed by both of them, transferring joint ownership of the house. Trent looked up, stunned. "You said you wanted to build it with me. Now I'm holding you to it." He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he set the paper down and pulled her into his lap, his kiss fierce and grateful. "I don't deserve you," he whispered against her mouth. "You deserve this," she said. "All of it?" They spent the rest of the day unpacking, dancing to old records and arguing about where the sofa should go. And that night, wrapped in mismatched sheets and surrounded by half-open boxes, Georgia fell asleep with her head on his chest and his arm curled tightly around her.